we clearly have an entitlement problem in the federal budget. Right now, that is, we owe a lot of people a lot of money, which we do not yet have a system for collecting, or a system for reducing our entitlement to them. You talk in the book about the idea of indexing pensions and long-term entitlements of any sort,
Right.
pensions or Medicare, to the rate of economic growth.
Right.
So that the people paying the bills in the future essentially are in the same page as the people receiving the pensions.
Right.
Want to talk about that a bit?
Right. Well, it seems like we move slowly. Originally, Social Security wasn't indexed at all, and so if it was based on your historical 35 years of earnings, and so if there's a lot of inflation, it doesn't look very good, and so they finally indexed it to inflation. But I think that they didn't go far enough, and they should really be indexing Social Security to GDP. And I'll explain why. Think of it this way. There are 3 generations alive at any time: children, the working adults, and the retired elderly, okay? Now, if you have these people all living in one house, as people used to do, what do you think would be done about income fluctuations or price fluctuations? Well, I think if you have grandma and grandpa and the mom and dad and the children, you share among all 3 of you, right? So if the family income goes way up, then all 3 generations benefit. And if the family income goes way down, then all 3 generations scrimp and save. That's common sense, right? So you'd think that Social Security should apply the same common sense, but it doesn't. The Social Security was written from the standpoint of the elderly only, so they are indexed to inflation and they're guaranteed fixed. If the GDP should disappoint, then all of that has to be taken out of the children and the working adults. Doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. No, but the numbers of retirees as a proportion of the population is rising. Would you index this to, would that affect the index? Or would
it should, right.
It should.
The demographic should also affect. So it should be a common sense system, like what a loving family would do. And yet that seems so remote. We tend to put our talk in jargon that conceals the underlying truth.
Maybe it's not so remote. After all, the whole idea, this would be a way of formally saying we're all in this together.
Right, and I would like the government to issue GDP-linked bonds, or actually share. This sounds wild,
cool.
But I'm working with a Canadian economist who's trying to promote this in Canada. Both the U.S., Canada, every country should issue shares in their GDP instead of debt, and then those shares could be put into pension portfolios. I have to understand what I mean by a share in your GDP. It's a security that pays out some fraction of your GDP every quarter. When GDP is announced, you get your, we suggested calling them trills. They would be a 1 trillionth share of GDP. So if you buy 1 trill, it would, right now it's about $15 you get every year. Next year it could be higher or lower depending on economic situation. It helps protect the U.S. government from being too leveraged. Right now we have a leverage problem. The government borrows in fixed amount, it's got to pay a fixed amount back. And then when the economy falters, as it has, it gets really tight and difficult. So why should we, let's deleverage the U.S. government. And then so what they owe will depend. And then it works out beautifully. Pensions could invest in this, and then we'd all be sharing in the pie. The GDP is the pie that we divide up among the generations.